Welcome to Pick Yourself Up. I am Assegid Habtewold, your host. Today, I have a special guest. Her name is Sylvia Baffour. She is an expert on emotional intelligence. She traveled around the country to talk about emotional intelligence, empower leaders around the world. Today, we're going to talk about what is and what is not emotional intelligence. Why should we invest on our emotional intelligence, which means what are the benefits? And also, we're going to talk about how to take your emotional intelligence to the next level. Sylvia, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
For the people who may not know you, would you please take 60 seconds and tell us who is Sylvia and why are you passionate about emotional intelligence?
Wow, 60 seconds, huh? How do you capture things in 60 seconds? I know. It's a good challenge. So I'm from Ghana. Ghana is my home country, and I lived in 7 different countries before I came to the States. And I've been in the professional speaking world now for about 17 years. And emotional intelligence, I think, is one of the questions you're asking me. Why did I become passionate about it? Because I think the reality is that we live in relation to other people, and there's no way that we can succeed in life on our own. We need other people to collaborate with, to team up with, and those things can happen if we're not practicing the skills of emotional intelligence. And so it's just a natural I think a value for me to cherish and work on as much as possible, and to keep practicing and building upon through the rest of my life,
Thank you. I know you wrote a book. Would you tell us a little bit about 3 takeaways from your book?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called I Dare You to Care. It's an emotional intelligence book that essentially helps people with strategies to figure out how they can be more inspirational, more influential, and to really achieve remarkable growth in their personal and professional lives. And I dispel some of the myths about emotional intelligence and just talk about the fact that, they say the happiest people in the world, which I know we all want to be happy, the happiest people in the world are those who have meaningful and sustained connections with other human beings. And so throughout the book, I share strategies to help us become the kinds of people that other people enjoy being around.
You talked about demystifying some of the myths about emotional intelligence, and I also facilitate workshops and webinars on the theme emotional intelligence. And sometimes I get pushbacks. I'm sure you've been having that kind of challenges from people who may misunderstand what is and what's not emotional intelligence. Based on your research, would you please clarify what is and what is not emotional intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one that's asked often. And I think maybe I'll start off by saying that emotional intelligence, what it is not about being soft. Or emotional intelligence is not just about being nice, for the sake of being nice. It's emotional intelligence is simply a skill we use to engage in life with people we may disagree with, people we agree with, to get our points across, to just manage what we're doing with how we feel in any given moment. That's part of emotional intelligence. So the way I see it is, the bottom line is this. Especially for people, because I know culturally, I come from Ghana, and I know that in Africa, guys are taught to hide their emotions and just man up, and emotional intelligence is not something you should pay attention to. And I think quite the contrary, because the bottom line definition to me of emotional intelligence is this: are you using your emotions to work for you or against you? And do you care about the impact that your emotions are having on you and the people around you? That is it in a nutshell. And I think that it was the comedian Jim Carrey who I think said it best when he said, the effect that you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. The effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is, because of everything it buys us. When we have a good effect on other people, it opens the doors to opportunities, collaboration. It just makes our lives richer and easier. And so anyone who doesn't think about emotional intelligence as an important skill set, I would say embrace it. It's really, really vital for us to work on and have at our disposal in our lives.
You mentioned one thing that I want to expand, which is about especially male who have been discouraged to show their emotions. And I came from that culture too. As a man, you're not, especially if you are a leader, you're not supposed to cry. You should not also feel sorry. You have to always man up, like you said. Now, for people who may still be influenced by I changed, but for men from our culture who are not yet convinced, what would you say to them so that they will take it seriously, overcome the myth, and start to be open in terms of being friendly with their emotions and the emotions of others?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, especially for men who are socialized, unfortunately, to just do away with emotion, right? And just piggybacking on what I said before, if 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 you don't care about your emotions, chances are you're not using them to work for you. You're not using them in your favor. And so what I say to people who don't think that emotional intelligence is something to care about, that it's a value in your professional journey and all of that, I would say think about a couple of scenarios. What would it mean to you to be in a high stakes job interview, right? And be able, it's a high stakes job interview where there's so many other candidates. You absolutely want this position. You feel like you deserve it. What would it mean to you if you can practice some tools and strategies to help you manage the nerves that you're inevitably going to feel because the stakes are high? What does it mean to you to be able to manage your emotions in a way that the rest of the candidates did not, and therefore excel in the interview when others crumbled because they got nervous and forgot what they wanted to say? You know, what would it mean to you to be the person who scores a really big business deal that above and beyond your competitors because you took the steps to empathize with your prospective client and understand what they were feeling, where they were coming from, what they needed, that resulting in you scoring this really big sales deal that no one else was given? You know, what would it mean to you to be the manager who has to deliver a difficult conversation to your direct reports? And you know it's going to be a difficult conversation, but you deliver it in a way that leaves them still feeling energized and inspired and wanting to serve and be a part of your organization, right? With good morale. So all those things take emotional intelligence. So for the person who just thinks about the technicality, you know, it was Gallup that recently did a survey that said people said that they were 400 times less likely to leave a manager or a boss who was emotionally intelligent. And Harvard Business Review has done a number of studies that show that when you look at your long-term job success, only 25% of your success can be attributed to your skill set. And 75% is attributed to your people skills, your ability to understand yourself, to manage your own emotions, and manage the impact you're having on people around you. It is priceless. And in fact, you see countless job companies like Google, IBM, all the big brands right now, where emotional intelligence is what leads their interviewing questions. So if you're the person who's sitting there saying, I'm a brilliant coder and I don't need to care about EI, I guarantee in this era we're living in now, you're going to miss out on opportunities, because when people are matched up against you with the same skill set level, what separates you from the others? It's your ability to connect and empathize and manage your emotions and channel your nerves in a productive way. So I hope that we all care more about emotional intelligence.
These are really great tips, and also justifications for people to really take it seriously. You mentioned about how it is important for interviews, for managers and business owners and so on. Would you also talk about the benefits for people, let's say, in their relationships, at home, in the neighborhood, where people interact? What is the benefit, or what are the justifications for people who may not be managers or people who are not business owners? What do they benefit if they invest in their emotional intelligence?
Yeah, it's a good question, because, you know, emotional intelligence doesn't just span the business world, right? What happens in our personal space impacts our business space and vice versa. So I would say, you know, emotional intelligence benefits us in our home spaces, in our communities, because it helps us build better relationships. You know, think about it. We're living in this global world where your neighbors are probably from different countries or different life experiences. And so if we use the empathy tool, which is a tool in emotional intelligence, to say, what must it feel like to be the other person, to live in their shoes, right? That allows you to connect. I mean, think about people in your community that you really enjoy being around. You think that, you know, you enjoy being in their presence, right? many of us don't stop to think about the fact that there's a lot of behind the scenes work that that person is doing to make them enjoyable to be around. Maybe it's the way they listen without judgment. They're not just waiting for their turn to talk. I mean, so many of us, we forget this idea that we have one mouth and two ears for a reason. Emotional intelligence helps us in our relationships get along with people, because when we're emotionally triggered, we have the tools to help us manage what we're doing with how we feel, so that we have the best outcome in the face of whatever emotional trigger we may have. Maybe you're having a difficult conversation with someone, your neighbor, and it leaves you feeling disrespected, or with your spouse. You know, your first instinct is to have negative self-talk. You know, we don't realize this, but when we are triggered, we have unproductive self-talk in our heads, which leads to unproductive actions. And so when you're an emotionally intelligent person, you start to say, okay, my spouse or my neighbor has triggered me by making me feel disrespected. Instead of you flying off the handle with negative self-talk that says, oh no, I can't believe he just did that to me, your empowered, emotionally intelligent response becomes, is it possible she did not mean to offend me? Just asking more productive questions that allow us to calm down so we can be the best version of ourselves, essentially, each and every day of our lives. So emotional intelligence is priceless in ensuring that we develop relationships with people who want to be in our presence. And when that happens, the doors open to so much opportunity in life.
Let's also help those organizations and communities who may not be taking emotional intelligence seriously. What do they benefit if they create that environment where people are empowered to improve their emotional intelligence? Once I heard that they hire them for their technical skills and IQ, and they fire them for the lack of emotional intelligence, which means companies, organizations, they hire people for their technical skills, know-how, and their IQ, but once they get into the door, they couldn't be able to get along with other people because they don't have emotional intelligence. They don't get along. So what are the justifications for these kind of organizations, communities, businesses that are not taking emotional intelligence seriously? What are the business cases for this?
Well, I mean, one of the most important business cases is that within most organizations, people work in teams. And if I don't know a single CEO of a company who would not want to develop high trust teams within their organization. And you cannot develop high trust teams if people are not practicing emotional intelligence, you know, where people are listening to each other, empathizing, imagining how it feels to be in the other person's shoes, choosing their communication productively, the way that you email somebody for a request. Do you leave them feeling emotionally bruised where they're now complaining about the manner in which it was requested instead of focusing on what you needed from them in the first place? The business case is so obvious. And I think more and more organizations are realizing that if you're hiring somebody for their technical skills and yet firing them for their people skills, then you need to care about adding people skills to it almost seems crazy, right? Like, I'm going to hire you because you're an amazing technical engineer, but because you curse at everyone who sends you an email and you don't speak to people well and you're unfriendly, we're going to fire you. Those things should matter up front in the interviews. You know, because the very things that lose people their jobs should be what should matter when you're screening for those roles. You know, companies need to care about the culture that they are building, especially in the virtual environment we live in. They have to care because you're no longer having water cooler conversations where you can see people face to face and form those connections. So you've got to challenge yourself to think, how can we create a culture where we allow people to still feel energized, like they're part of the organization, that they can have an impact, that we see them and we hear them. Those things ought to matter. Any company that just cares about the bottom line, we're going to be reading about them in the history books of dust very soon. You know, you work with human beings, not robots. And so you have to care about ensuring that those human beings feel valued and feel like they want to show up every day and contribute to your organization.
These are really jam-packed tips that you're giving to business owners and or leaders of organizations. Dear our viewers, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and continue our conversation. Don't go away.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public, stay 6 feet or more from others, follow state and local guidelines, and wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
Welcome back. I am with Sylvia Baffour. She is an expert on emotional intelligence. We've been talking about what is and what's not emotional intelligence. We talked about why people in cultures where emotional intelligence is not appreciated should really take it seriously and more. In the next part of our conversation, we're going to continue to talk about, for example, how you could be able to improve your emotional intelligence. What is the place of emotional intelligence? Where we are in crisis and more. So stay tuned. Sylvia, let's talk about a couple of things before we go to the next. Based on the discussion we had, there are some people who may, I would say, may be interested. They understand that emotional intelligence is important, but they don't know what to do. So what are those practical things they could do to take their emotional intelligence to the next level?
Yeah, I think it's a common dilemma because emotional intelligence can seem like such a big concept, right? And it is important to bring it down to the nitty gritty, just the basics of lived experience. How can we incorporate things that help us use our emotional intelligence daily? And I think for me, what I find in all the presentations I do that I find myself speaking the most about is what I call minding your monologue. One of the things we take the most for granted is the fact that throughout our entire lives we will hear our voice more than anyone else's voice on the planet, from the day we're born until the day we die. And so the most important thing we must get a hold of if we want to be successful in terms of using our emotional intelligence is our monologue, the conversations that we have with ourselves, most especially when things aren't going right. I often say that emotional intelligence is not a skill set that we need when our lives are rosy and peachy and everything is firing on all cylinders and our lives are great. Emotional intelligence doesn't even come into mind. We need emotional intelligence in the most inconvenient times of all, when you don't want to manage your emotions because you've been triggered and it's just easier to fly off the handle and curse someone out, right? It takes work to manage what you're doing with how you feel. So the first strategy I would say is to think about taking hold of your self-talk, or what I call the monologue, the conversation you're having with yourself about what lies ahead. I was doing a presentation with some IT professionals at the World Bank a few years ago, and I did this exercise where I asked two women to go from the back of the room to the front. It was a 90-minute talk, and I left two seats in the front open. And I asked them to pack up their belongings 75 minutes into the presentation. And one of them, they both got up and they're dragging themselves, and then one went around and went and sat back down, and she, seemed frazzled. And the other one came and sat in front seat. And long story short, unbeknownst to both of them, I had stuck two $100 gift cards underneath the front two seats. And that was simply the reward for these ladies for being good sports. So the only one lady got it, right, because she came and sat in the front. And I asked her, I said, ma'am, can you tell the rest of us what your self-talk was as you were moving from the back to the front? And she said, I was thinking, I hate sitting in the front row. I can't understand why Sylvia is doing this. She's embarrassing us. It's uncomfortable. Happy hours in 30 minutes. And it was right after my presentation. And the point I make is that I don't say that at the end of everything uncomfortable we are asked to do in life, there's going to be some financial reward waiting for us. What I am saying is, how often are we having catastrophic conversations with ourselves about what lies ahead that in the end wasn't even that bad for us, and yet we've talked ourselves out of an opportunity, like the lady in the back of the room who didn't move did. And so one of the biggest strategies in growing your emotional intelligence is to get a hold of your self-talk by asking yourself routinely, am I minding my monologue? As you go through the day, somebody triggers you, your instinct is just to not even pay attention to the conversation. And guess what? It's impacting what you're doing because it's impacting how you feel. So if you can just snap in those moments of trigger and say, am I minding my monologue? Just that will bring you down to a place where you're more aware of what you're about to say to somebody or how you're about to act. I think another one is what I call adopting the prism perspective, because growing your emotional intelligence is a lot of stuff you can do personally, but some of the journey must come from the outside. We depend on people around us to shine a light on our blind spots. There's things we don't see about ourselves that are called blind spots for a reason. And so I have this exercise I love to do called the prism perspective, where I have a handful of questions that I ask people to give to people in their circles of influence. You have maybe 3 people at work you can give it to. Questions like, what are 2 or 3 things you find positive about me? Do you think of me as someone who makes room for the feelings of others? What is the one thing I could do differently that would impact my success the greatest? And you get anonymous feedback from these people from those questions, right? And the reason I call it a prism perspective is because, like the shape of a prism, right? If you shine a light on a prism, no matter what angle the light comes out at, it refracts this beautiful rainbow. And much in the same way that when we shine a spotlight on our own lives by having people give us input, it makes our lives that much richer and more complete, because we have a good sense of who you are, not because of who you think you are, but also from how people experience you. And then finally, I would just say, another way to raise your emotional intelligence is to start getting more curious about your judgments than attached to them. Because in life, we all have to make judgments. Every day, you have to judge situations, circumstances, and people, because we have to make decisions. So it's human to make judgments. But I invite people to think about getting more curious about their judgments, not just attached to them. So when a judgment filters through your head, you're like, I wonder why I'm thinking this about this person. Interrogating our judgments may reveal things that we hadn't even thought about. It stops us from being so robotic as we move through life.
All right, these are really great tips that you have given to our audience on how to take their emotional intelligence to the next level. I want to add, especially for people who are scientists, the technical aspect of how emotions are created. When we gather data through our sense organs, they come to our spinal cord, and first we're gonna have a feeling in our midbrain. And these data are gonna go to our neocortex, and we start to think about it. And the good thing to know about the physiology is that because we may not be able to really change what we felt because of what we heard or touched or saw, but we can really change what we're thinking. And you told us how to really focus on the monologue, because we have control in our thoughts, because we cannot change our emotions. And understanding that physiology is very important for people to focus more on their thoughts than the actual feeling they are experiencing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great explanation for the scientists, the left brain folks who are listening in today.
Yeah. One tool I may add, which you may already know about, is called Pfat. I give this tool to our audience, helping them to have a tool that they can immediately use whenever they are emotionally triggered. For example, let's say that I'm driving downtown and my workshop is going to be in 15 minutes, but I'm in traffic, worried about it. Right now, I am taxing myself. I'm emotionally charged. I should not continue to have that emotion. I should stop and say Pfat, which means, what are some of the physical things that I'm feeling right now? Am I sweating? Am I clenching my hands? Am I feeling nervous? And also, what am I feeling? The F one, Pfat. So the F is, what am I feeling right now? Am I nervous? I'm anxious? Am I worried? And then the A, how am I appearing to other people? And then the T is what I'm thinking right now. And then once I quickly take this audit, which means what I'm physically experiencing right now, what I'm feeling right now, and how am I appearing to other people into the outside world, and then I focus on the T, which is the thinking. I could say, okay, I know I am late. I cannot change anything, but let me call maybe to the client. Now, my focus changed. Rather than worrying about me being late and fuss about it and work down myself, which can impact my presentation, I could change the focus. Okay, now I'm going to be late. There's nothing I can do about the traffic, but I can call to the client and let them know that I may be late. So Pfat is very powerful when we find ourselves. We can use this tool anywhere, whenever we feel like emotionally stressed, Pfat, and make that audit, and then make the shift in our focus. Do you have any tool, or do you want to add something on this, or do you have any other tool or something that you could suggest to our audience?
Yeah, I do have a tool. I think it helps more so even with resilience. It's what I say that in those moments when we're triggered, we tend to be asking ourselves unproductive questions. We're always going to have a conversation with ourselves when we are triggered by something. And oftentimes the conversation we're having in our heads is something we reframe as what I call a barricading question in our lives. Questions that begin with the word why. They are questions, I call them barricading because they block in our thinking. They literally barricade us in and leave us feeling helpless. So you're in traffic, why is this car in front of me? That's a very unproductive question to be asking, right? And so the tool is to invite people to ask more gateway questions. And I use the word gateway because they're questions that begin with how or what, and they open up the gates to forward thinking. So instead of somebody saying, for instance, why did I get passed up for a promotion? You're saying, how can I boost my skill set and marketability? It's important to think about reframing. That's a technique when we're triggered, reframing the way we are talking to the questions we're asking ourselves. So we ask more how and what connected questions that make us more productive and feel more resilient.
We are almost out of time. Let me give you this opportunity. Is there anything that you would like to summarize quickly in 1 minute for our audience so that they will get something that maybe we couldn't be able to cover in this interview?
Yeah, well, real quick, just piggybacking, I would say for anyone who thinks emotions are things to be done away with, we have all the spectrum of emotions, anger, sadness, happiness, so that we can experience them. They're given to us as human beings for a reason. And I think it's important that we stop labeling them as negative emotions, because anything negative in your life, you want to get away from. Right? We don't want to attach ourselves to things that are negative. And so calling it difficult emotions, this allows us to see that they're emotions that are challenging us to think about how we can experience them differently. So it's important to think about all the emotions must be experienced by human beings. Just labeling them as negative makes it unproductive because you spend time doing away with it instead of experiencing it to make you a more wholesome human being.
Wow, I wish we have more time to ask you more questions, but we have to stop it here. How can people reach out to you?
So LinkedIn is always a good way, right? Sylvia Baffour, LinkedIn, I guess it's just typing Sylvia Baffour. But I also have a podcast show called I Dare You to Care, which can be found on Apple and Spotify. If anyone would like to hear a little bit more in-depth stuff about emotional intelligence. And then finally, my website, which is sylviaspeaks.com.
Sylvia, on behalf of our audience, I want to thank you for coming here and sharing these great tools, tips, and a lot of strategies and tactics that are going to help us to become better as leaders and individuals to take our emotional intelligence to the next level. Dear our viewers, thank you very much for watching. If you have any suggestions or any questions, please, you will find my email down there, assegid@successpws.com. You can send me suggestions who I should interview, what kind of themes we should cover, and also connect with us on social media. Until I see you with another interview, thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to see you again. Have a great day. Thank you.